and then we're wanting to practice them on our land. What have you seen is important to know about that?
Okay, well, we're getting into the realms of cultural appropriation here too, which is a big thing. And I think especially for a lot of Americans, because there's so much kind of guilt and sensitivity around Native American cultures, we kind of don't have that so much as a big thing here in Britain and I guess in Europe. I often will hear people say, if you're doing any practices that are not from your own culture, then it's cultural appropriation. And I want to kind of challenge that, because if you're being taught by someone who has been properly brought up in their traditions, holds their traditions close to their heart, has authority in those traditions, and is freely teaching them to you, then it's not cultural appropriation. Lots of the Native American teachers that I've worked with over the years have said things like, you guys had these teachings, but you threw them away. We want to give them you back. And so that's fine. You know, I've been taught by different people from different cultures, mostly Native American and Northern Asian and Himalayan. And I've been initiated into different practices. You get empowerments and whatever, and initiations which enable you to actually do those practices. That's very different to maybe seeing something on YouTube, seeing somebody performing a ceremony on YouTube and thinking, I'd like to do that. Let's have a go. Because there's a thing from when I trained in psychotherapy, it was I was one of the first people in Britain who trained in NLP. My psychotherapy trainer was brought back NLP. This was in the 80s, long before anybody had ever heard of it. And they talk about...
You've really surprised me. You're probably about the last person I would have thought trained in NLP. You're full of surprises.
I trained in NLP, and then I went and did a year's course on Ericksonian trance induction in a London teaching hospital, because Milton Erickson was one of the people that Bandler and Grinder, who created NLP, kind of studied. Yeah, totally. They, in NLP, right at the beginning, I don't know if they still talk about it, but they talked about deep structure and surface structure, and it's a term from linguistics. And I think it's hugely important in any kind of magical tradition. So it's like you can watch a film of a shaman doing a ceremony on YouTube, and all you're seeing is the surface structure. You're seeing his moves, his costume, his drum, all the stuff that he's doing. And therefore, if you try and do that, all you're doing is copying the surface structure. The deep structure is the understanding of why he's doing it, how he's connecting with the spirits, his whole cosmology of the spirit world, and everything into relationship within that. So it's important, really essential, important to understand and to cultivate that knowledge of the deep structure. And that's lacking in so many of today's kind of new age stuff. There's a lot of focus on surface structure. You know, you can dress up in all the feathers and bells and whistles, but if you don't have, well, I describe it a little bit. My partner Faith is an artist, and she did a lot of life drawing. And if you don't understand the bones of the model that you're doing the life drawing of, and you're only drawing the flesh, then the drawing doesn't have realism, because it doesn't have the structure. And I think that's a pretty good way of, I think that's a good way of putting it. So it's like, if you only understand the surface structure, you've got the flesh of the ceremony, but there's no bones that are supporting it. And if you don't have bones, then the whole thing just falls apart. And from the other end of that, if you understand the bones, then you can put your own flesh on it, because you understand how it works. And so I think it's hard to teach. I think some people get the bones, they understand it on a deep level, and a lot of people don't, and it's quite hard. I often complain a bit about Tibetan Buddhist stuff, because when in Buddhist practice you do these long, what are called sadhanas, and they're long practices, and they are as one of my Native American teachers used to describe church prayers, they are canned prayers. You know, he used to in ceremony, he used to say no canned prayers. It's like you've got to be from the heart, in the moment, spontaneous. And Tibetan Buddhist practices, and they can be yards long, they are canned prayers. And I often describe a lot of Tibetan Buddhist practices as kind of teaching magic to numpties. It's like it's the ABCs, and it's because the people don't necessarily understand the deep structure. And if you understand the deep structure, you don't need all those canned prayers. And maybe the canned prayers will help you learn about, or, you know, teach you about the deeper structure. But that's the thing that you've got to aim for. It's not about doing all the fancy moves and wearing all the fancy gear and doing all the fancy stuff. It's the deep structure.